If you use mobility devices, it's pretty much inevitable that you're going to be experiencing falls at some point in your life. It doesn't happen super often because pretty quickly after we have to start using these devices, we learn how to avoid falls or how to pick ourselves back up. That being said, we're humans. We're not perfect. Accidents do happen. And what is important is that you, as well as we, know what to do where someone with a mobility device happens to fall in public. The reason this video topic came up is because I've always been someone who researches when they get bored. Don't know why, I just am. And one day I was curious. I wanted to see how much information was available to non-disabled people about what to do when a disabled person falls. And I wanted to know how accurate the information was because, unfortunately, I have fallen in public. I've fallen while using my forearm crutches before, back when I used those to get around. And I have also fallen out of my power chair before, both times in public. And unfortunately, the way that people went about doing anything about it was less than ideal for me. And to my shock and sadness, there were endless resources on both Google and YouTube for people who use wheelchairs on what to do if they fall or how to prevent falling. But I spent hours looking and I found nothing directed at non-disabled people on how they can help someone. And the thing is, you guys know, I try to be as educational as I can. I'm not always going to get it perfectly correct, but I do the best that I can on my channel to give you good resources for stuff like this. And I think that if nobody tells non-disabled people how to deal with a situation like this, how are they supposed to just magically know? How are they supposed to, make the world more accessible to us or do better by us if we haven't bothered telling them how to help? So that's what I'm setting out to do in this video today. I'm setting out to try to help you understand better what you can do to help people in this situation. I do happen to now use a power chair 100% of the time when I am out in public. So the information in this video may not pertain necessarily to someone who uses another mobility device, such as walkers, crutches, or canes. For that, you'll have to reach out to a person who does. Also, my experiences in a power chair may not be exactly the same as someone in a wheelchair, so I very much encourage anyone else who uses mobility devices to do follow-up videos to this where you explain things from your perspective, because the best way we can be a good resource to people that we want to help us is by getting as much information out as possible and letting them kind of put all of it together and get a good picture. All right, so jumping in now, you're out in public. Say that you're getting groceries, because it can happen when you're getting groceries. And you are in the aisle, you're grabbing the stuff that you're looking for, and you see someone fall out of their wheelchair. Your first instinct as a human being with a conscience is probably going to be to gasp and be a little bit shocked, because it is shocking and yeah, it does, draw a little attention to it, but don't feel bad about the fact that you had a human reaction to a human experience. It might be a little bit bothersome for us, but it's not the end of the world that you gasped. You may want to automatically run over to the person, grab hold of them by the arms or by, the underarms, hoist them up and help them out. But that's the exact opposite of what you should do, actually. I've had people do that before, and it can cause serious harm. The thing is, you don't know why someone is in a wheelchair, and you're not entitled to that information. They don't have to tell you, and you should never ask why someone is in a wheelchair. There is any number of reasons they could be using it. They could be paralyzed. They could have a disease. They could have just had a very major surgery, and this is the only way they can get out and about if they are living completely independently and they don't have any help, or even if they do have help, they could be using it for that. They could have chronic pain. They could have any kind of balance issue or POTS or something like that. There's a million and one reasons someone could be using a wheelchair and you don't know why this individual happens to be using theirs. So if you just run straight over to them and grab hold of them and start moving them around, you could really hurt that person badly. My real life example to this is one of the reasons I try to push people away if I am trying to get up from a fall is because if people do touch my arms or try to hoist me from the underarms, it causes extreme pain, sometimes to the extent that I will black out and become unconscious, which doesn't help in this situation in the slightest. It just makes everything so much worse. So we try to avoid that. Instead, what I personally need, if I ask for it, is for people to grab hold of like the mid section of my waist, kind of like a bear hug from behind, and let me push down on their arms with all of my might to lift myself up. And just because how it works for me doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. Every individual is going to have their own way they need to be moved. So please, although it might be your first instinct, do your best to not just run up and touch the person. Instead, here's basically a step-by-step on what you can do. So the person's fallen. If they don't immediately get up, try to wait about 5 seconds before doing anything. If in 5 seconds they have made absolutely no move at all to get themselves up, then very discreetly approach them. Stay about 5 to 6 feet away from the person and discreetly as you can ask them, "Hey, would you like some help?" This is when things get extremely important and you really need to be listening to the individual who has fallen. If the person says, "No, I'm okay, I just need a minute," leave them alone. You can ask them, "Well, would you like me to, stand by and make sure people don't bother you?" If they say no, move along and behave as though nothing ever happened. Just carry on getting your groceries and then go home as you usually would. If they do ask you to stand by, then simply do that. Simply do as they ask. Make sure that people aren't bothering them. And this is something important, whether the person is conscious or unconscious after they fall. Do everything in your power to keep a decent radius around them open. One of the worst things that I've personally had happen when I've fallen in public before is people who are just gawkers. Sometimes they want to help and sometimes they're just gawkers surrounding me. Surrounding a person who has fallen out of their wheelchair, again, just like picking them up, can be extremely dangerous to them. You can end up making it so they can't get enough room to get themselves back into their chair. You can make it so they have a panic attack if they have some kind of mental illness. You can make it so they end up getting hurt trying to avoid everyone who's standing around them. So do everything you can to try to keep the crowds at bay. If for some reason you've politely asked everyone to stay away from the person and they are outright refusing, then this is where it's acceptable to get an authority figure involved. If you are in a storefront of some kind, there's always some kind of upper management around. Just ask an associate for one. And if you are out in public someplace, outside, there's still always police or somebody nearby that can help you. The last point I want to make about someone saying they don't actually need any help and they're perfectly capable of getting themselves back into their wheelchair is that sometimes it looks worse than it actually is. Depending on the individual's mobility, it can take time for them to hoist themselves back up. Be patient and don't assume that if it looks like the person is struggling, they actually are. Sometimes it can take a good few minutes for them to get their bearings well enough to get themselves back up, and sometimes they'll get back up pretty much immediately. So if it seems like it's taking a particularly long time for them to get back into their wheelchair, you can always ask them once more, "You don't need any help, right?" And again, if they say no, just leave them to it. Now we're coming into what to do if the person does need help. So you ask, hey, do you need any help? And they say, actually, yeah, I'm having a hard time. So this is when you do approach them and get close enough that you can hear them well. And the first thing you should do, again, don't automatically reach out to them. Keep your arms to yourself. It's just like when you were in school. Keep your hands to yourself. Instead, just say, okay, what do you need me to do? And follow their instructions to the letter. This person knows their body and their needs much better than you ever will. So if they simply tell you, oh, I just need you to hold on to my chair so it doesn't scoot away while I'm getting back into it, just hold the chair. Don't do anything else. And especially if the person needs you to put your hands on them, you need to listen like you've never listened before to exactly how they need you to touch them. Using myself as an example again, if I told you to put your arms around a very specific part of my body and let me do the rest, that is all you should be doing. Don't think that you're being helpful by doing something extra or by, grabbing hold. Like, I know that some of it is instinct. If you don't think that you'll be able to control your baser instincts and you don't think you'll be able to keep yourself from touching a person in a way that does not help them in the situation, simply tell them that unfortunately you don't think you'll be able to help and let someone else step in instead. Once the person has returned to their wheelchair, if they thank you, simply say you're welcome and ask them once more if they're good to go. If they are, continue on again, just like nothing ever happened. It can be very embarrassing and very scary to fall out of your wheelchair in public. I mean, when you break it down, that is the most vulnerable situation a wheelchair user can be in. Falling out of your mobility device puts you at risk of pretty much everything you can think of because you're without your number one means of escape in that moment. When you think of it that way, doesn't that sound pretty scary? And that's exactly where your fight or flight instincts are gonna come into effect and tell you, oh crap, I'm kind of in danger right now. I need to make sure that I get to safety as quickly as possible before anything bad can happen. Even if we know we're in a safe environment where nothing bad will happen, it's still difficult to not worry, at least a little bit, especially if you're surrounded by people you don't know, because at the end of the day, you just don't know what's in someone else's heart and you don't know what they may or may not do to someone. So don't call attention to what happened, just carry on. If you see them in the parking lot, just leave them alone and stuff unless they engage with you. Likewise, if, weeks, days, years, whatever, after this event takes place, you are out somewhere else and you happen to see them. Maybe you see them in the same grocery store. Maybe you see them just out in a park or something. If you see them in the future, do not engage, You can do like a polite little wave or hello as you would with anyone else in public, but don't be like, oh, hey, how's it going? Or like make jokes or anything. Like, I and everyone I know hate it if somebody has had to help us in the past and then they decide to make jokes and stuff. It makes you feel kind of like they see you as a child, like when you were little and you'd fall down, your dad would be like, whoops, like, oh, your legs aren't working or something like that. That's what it feels like. So try not to make jokes after the fact and try not to call attention to the fact that they did fall out of their wheelchair at some point. That's the last thing they want to go back and remember. The last item on this big long list is if you do see someone fall out of their wheelchair and you ask them if they're okay and they don't answer because they have unfortunately fallen unconscious, which I've been in that situation as well. There are some really important steps you need to follow if someone falls and is rendered unconscious. The first once again, is not to panic. That doesn't help anyone. The second is something that I wish people paid attention to with me, which is it doesn't matter how much medical background you have, you don't get to just decide things for that person. One of the times that I've fallen in public, I was seen to by a woman who said she used to be a paramedic. She was a retired paramedic, and she was trying to make every decision for me. I knew what I needed in that moment. I knew I was fine, that I just needed to go home and eat something very specific and get some rest, and I was going to be okay because it was the kind of fall I have inside my house all the time. It just happened in public this time. Rather than listening to me and helping me to get to my car, which is what I kept saying I needed, she kept on insisting on pushing me back to the ground and telling me I couldn't get up and calling the ambulance. An ambulance I wasn't going to be able to afford. I was like, no, that isn't what I need. It isn't what I want. Please stop. And it had to get to a point where the manager of the storefront that I fell in front of and the people on the ambulance had to basically tell her to shove off and leave me alone. And the most annoying part of that was that once the ambulance arrived, this lady just vanished. She didn't care. She wasn't actually trying to help. She was trying to make herself look good because, of course, I had gawkers there. And that's the opposite of what you want to do when someone's unconscious. Again, definitely, more than ever, keep people from crowding someone, because if they suddenly come to, it's scary. When you've passed out unexpectedly, when you wake up, it's already terrifying enough knowing that it happened, but being surrounded by people you don't know, I do immediately fly into a panic attack, and that can be a danger to you and them. Try to avoid that at all costs. Give them a couple of minutes. Continuously, discreetly ask them if they're okay. If after like the third try they still haven't responded to you in any way, this is when it's time to, get medical intervention. This is when you need to try to stay with them if you can and get an associate involved and ask them if there are any nurses or doctors available. And if you absolutely can't, then try to flag somebody over to keep watch over the person while you do get them some help. And beyond that, just let the medical professional deal with them. But once again, if you are a medical professional, please listen to the person. I understand that you're trying to do your job, but that person isn't your patient. They are just someone out and about who just needs you to make sure they're not dead. I know there's a lot more I could add to this list, and again, I strongly encourage anyone else who uses mobility devices to please make their own video subject on this. This is very important, and it's extremely scary to me that there aren't many resources for this out there, but hopefully you learned something today. Do something that makes you happy today, no matter what anyone else thinks about it, and I'll see all of you again soon.